Just a little bit of background. I was a serial entrepreneur for 20 some odd years in the Valley, came out in 78. I retired in the internet bubble, not because I was a genius, but because I knew when to go home. So I took the money off the table and retired in 99, and actually had some time to reflect on successes and failures over the last, actually it was 8 startups. One of the things I did, taking some time off, is I thought, I'm going to write my memoirs. Great, I'm a successful entrepreneur, great executive. Oh, I was so proud of myself. And I started typing. Got 80 pages into it. My wife and daughter were out skiing. It was snowy Tahoe, watching the snow come down. Type, 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 type. Story, story, story. I was impressed. Ha, 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 look at this. And when I was done, 80 pages, I looked at it and said, I'd have to pay my wife and kids to read this. And that was the entire total available market of probably the book. But when I read, actually then with another eye of, thanks, Steve, for chuckling over this, I realized I accomplished 2 things. One is just emotionally for retirement. It really was a catharsis about, purging all of 20-some-odd years of war stories, realizing that I probably could have been indicted for most of this stuff in public companies, at least today. But 2 is most importantly and relevant to today's discussion, was I realized there were some patterns that were just coming up again and again, not only in companies that I had done, and 8 was, like a lot for an entrepreneur, but also by this time I had been sitting on advisory boards. I'd gotten friendly with a couple of VCs who were bringing me into their companies. And I'm realizing I was seeing patterns repeat time and again from startup to startup. And I was just kind of curious that why wasn't this pattern common wisdom? That is, we've been doing venture by 1999. Limited partnerships were about 20, 30 years old in Silicon Valley. Venture capitalists have been doing this for even longer, let's say 40 years as a business. Why wasn't the things that I were observing common wisdom? And when I started asking my VC friends, I started finding out that there were VCs with golden guts who could kind of predict, well, they're kind of in this state and here's the odds of this happening. But none of that wisdom had been passed on to entrepreneurs. And so I'm just trying to give you the rationale of what my thinking was for coming up with something called the customer development process. And if you really want details, because I always forget to say this at the end, if at the end of this lecture any of this is of interest, on Amazon you could find what really was my class text, which is an excuse of why there's all kinds of typos in a crummy cover, called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, which will take you through some anal retentive detail about the methodology, probably more than you'll ever want to know. But what really happened since I've written the text, and I teach a version of it here at Stanford in the engineering school, I also teach the same class, actually a specific customer development class, at the Haas Business School in Berkeley, and then a joint MBA class with Columbia on this early stage methodology. One of the students in my Berkeley class was an ex-VP of engineering of mine from a company about 10 or 15 years ago, and he had a very young and eager co-founder of his new company. And the only way I was going to get involved with their new company was if they would sit through my class. And lo and behold, not only did they get it, but this young and eager co-founder actually became somebody who got it better than I did, and went on to take the company using the customer development methodology from 0 to $1 million a month within 18 months. And that's Eric Reese, who will be part of this presentation. I wrote them into coming because I told them you'll get sick of listening to me for more than 45 minutes in a row. So Eric will give you some examples of what it looked like from the other side as a practitioner of the process, having nothing but this book that looked like it was printed on tree bark. With that, let me go through where we've taken customer development today. So the goals of this presentation was to give you some thoughts about a new way to look at startups, introduce the customer development and also the lean startup model to you, and translate this knowledge into hopefully a better company. How many of you are thinking about or doing a startup? Okay, well, that's I've never had anywhere 100% total available market. I mean, this is very funny. Okay, good, all right, good. You're the right audience. This is not the real estate class. So let me just repeat some of the obvious, because every good presenter repeats the obvious to make you think they're geniuses, so they just repeat what's going on outside the building. So the economy, as one knows, before, if you were entrepreneurs, up to literally the spigot shut off 6 months ago, cash was pretty available here in the Valley. You could get follow-on financing. You did not have to sell your children before. And nowadays, we know the debt markets are tight. More importantly, for not only you guys as entrepreneurs, but more importantly for your investors, they're looking at a blank wall when they used to see liquidity. The IPO market disappeared a year or two ago, but even now the M&A market is gone. So people who are doing investing have no idea how your company's going to get liquid. So they're uttering words never heard before in the Valley about early stage companies. You know what the word is? No. Profitability. Right? Well, it's a foreign concept for early stage ventures, and therefore VCs are depressed. Now, they're also depressed because a good number of them were taking monies from pension funds and college endowments, and because of the drop in the endowments, the amount of money those funds could put into VC funds, they're actually missing capital calls. Like Harvard's writing off a good bunch of VC funds. So venture fund returns have been declining for a decade, but now there really is no end in sight. And the state of startups were, historically, you built companies with a high burn rate because you were swinging for the fences. No, not everybody was like this, but that was a canonical model. If I told you, hey, we're going to we're building something we're going to sell or IPO at a couple $100 million, we're going to hire a full management team. By that I mean, okay, we started. Where's our VP of sales, VP of marketing, CEO, and CFO? What do you mean you don't have them? You're failing. And we're going to assume that this is an execution problem. Right? I got a great idea. By the way, I was funded from insert name of great VC here. Therefore, my idea's been blessed. And the only problem between me and liquidity is execution. I need to build up my company, build out my management team, and execute. Everything will be great. Implicit in that is that I understand who my customer and market is. That was implicit. Of course, all I have to do is execute. I'm right. I assume the features I need to build are known. I know who those customers are. These are the features I need, and all I have to do is execute. My observation is that startups, traditional startups, are fighting yesterday's war. This is a going out of business strategy. If any of you are sitting here going, why, yes, that's exactly what we're doing. Don't admit it to anybody sitting next to you. You're the ones looking at your feet going, ooh, maybe the real estate seminar would be better because I'm doing this. I will predict you're out of business, except for maybe some corner cases. This is the traditional model of how to build a startup. And you used to get credit for this. Ooh, when are you hiring your salespeople, marketing people? Good, you're going to do a launch. Great, we're executing. It turns out that there's a model that's predicated on constant assessment of change and ways to mitigate risk. It turns out in the military, the basis of the U.S. Marine Corps warfighting strategy is something called the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. Anybody in the military or been in the military? Oh my gosh, it's really the U.S. military. Anybody here? Oh, awesome. Okay. All right. It used to be that militaries were thought of as command and control systems, inflexible, etc. And actually, for most U.S. students who haven't been in the military, that's still their view. It turns out that's actually the view of the old Soviet command and control system. U.S. military was actually built to be highly flexible and to adapt based on changing circumstances on the ground. In fact, there was a warfighting strategy that was developed by a guy named John Boyd. Anybody ever hear about Boyd?
I know a lot about it. I've heard of him.
Anybody from the Air Force?
The Air Force guy.
Okay, you know about Boyd?
He's a colonel.
Yeah, good. Another piece of data, right?
And I think it had to do with air superiority.
You bet. Do you know where the only statue of Boyd is, by the way?
Oh, it should, but no.
Quantico. You know what Quantico is?
Yeah, it's a Marine base.
U.S. Marine Headquarters. Air Force colonel, hated in the Pentagon, was the one who actually developed this notion of energy maneuverability and was the father of the Pentagon Mavericks that came up with the F-16, lightweight fighter, etc. But basically, this was a guy who was known as 32nd Boyd, who, when he was teaching at Nellis combat tactics, challenged any of his students that he could get behind them in 30 seconds. And he never lost a bet. And he had a notion that really what air combat was about was observing, orienting, deciding an act in a loop much faster than anybody you're fighting. And if you could do that, it wasn't about your plane or your speed. It was a combination of the human and the aircraft being more maneuverable than anybody else. He not only pitched this in the Air Force, but as I'm inferring, the Marine Corps adopted it as a warfighting strategy. So what the heck does that have to do with startups? It turns out, in the business world, particularly in an early stage company, one of the things that's certain is that no business plan and no hypothesis ever survives first contact with the customer. Never. In fact, I don't know how many classes I've been through where my students go, but our plan said X. Anyone ever say that? Our plan said X. And I went, maybe we just ought to ship your plan to all the customers so they could read it. And so they would know what to do. Because obviously they're not working like your plan said. And the purpose of something like an OODA loop in the real world will allow you and your company to adapt to changing realities. And this is this whole notion of agility in a startup. And so this is concept first. So I'm just going through what's the big idea. And agility requires a continuous cycle of interactions. But one of the things I remind everybody, you can't be agile from behind your desk. And for those of you who do startups, I have to tell you, in my first couple, we'd argue about features for hours, days, and weeks in the office. Now, in hindsight, that's kind of silly. Because after the first iteration, what the heck do we know? And in fact, how many of you actually go to Stanford? Anybody here? Good. So you get to use the word, because you paid extra, hypothesis. But hypothesis is an expensive word only because you paid for Stanford. But in the real world, what is a hypothesis actually? What is it? A guess. So if you think about your initial plan, unless you're a domain expert, that's the only corner case, unless you've just come out of industry X and you're building the exact same thing with the exact same source code. No, forget the last part. But the exact same industry, right? That's the only corner case. Everything you have in your entire business plan is a series of untested hypotheses. Big idea. It's a fundamental idea to this customer development process. I don't believe a single word in your plan, even if it was funded. You know, what's worse is if it's funded, you think somehow that some geniuses have blessed it. I'll contend that the bigger the VC who invested in you, the bigger your ego and the worse problem you're going to have. Because there's still untested hypotheses. So the line that anybody's ever worked for me or taken a class from me has heard is, there are no facts inside the building, so get the hell out. To find a startup team sitting in a building arguing for days or weeks about feature sets is insane. You can't do this from a desk. Therefore, your company needs a methodology that keeps you in constant, painful contact with customers, the market, and the environment to test those hypotheses and turn them very rapidly into first approximations of facts. And what we have done is taken this notion of observe, orient, decide, and act, which really comes out of military war strategy, and translated it into a series of activities that could be done in early stage ventures. And it has two parts. One is customer development. And customer development is the interaction that a startup has with people outside the building. And you might say, well, Steve, are you using a bad euphemism for sales, marketing, and business development? It's the other way around. When I fund or do startups now, I don't let anybody have that title. Because here's another big idea. And it really is a scary one. Startups are not small versions of large companies. It's a big idea. A startup is not a junior version of IBM, Microsoft, Google, it's a pick your favorite company trying to get big. Because if it was, all you would say is, yeah, I need all those people, and then we just need to hire some more. I will contend that a startup in its early stage is a very different beast. The steering wheel is actually wired backwards. In a normal company, you turn left and the car turns left. In a startup, you could turn left and the car not only could go right, but it could go up or down or materialize in another dimension. And if you have a team who all they know are large company rules, you're already screwed. Anybody ever hire large company people in a, somebody immediately, what happened?
Disaster.
Why?
Wouldn't send their own faxes, needed people running around,
Right.
support staff. Really
So
key
one support staff. What else?
Hired a CEO, the first thing he did was bring in a decorator to decorate his office.
Right? Right. What else? Good. What else? Anybody hire a world-class salesperson?
Horrible.
Yeah, what happened?
Unless the PowerPoint was preset with the whole script that they could read right off of, word for word, they
Right.
won't copy it.
And what else do they know how to do? World-class salespeople.
a lot of money.
Why? What else? Golf. What else?
They talk around risk averse.
Right? Risk averse. What else do they have? What else do they? World-class salespeople. What do they come with? Rolodex. Great. What could be wrong with a Rolodex? Think about it. What could be wrong? That's why you want to hire them. They have a Rolodex. Perfect. What's wrong with that? Think. It might not. In fact, it might be antithetical to your needs. If all you have are people who want to execute their last big company in your small company, I guarantee you, you've just shut off learning from day one. Big idea. In a startup, your job is continual contact with customers to get into a learning and discovery process before you get into execution. This is not a big company writ small. Eventually, you will scale into one, but the things you do now are dramatically different. So, our idea, Eric and I came up with, is to combine this customer development methodology with an agile product development methodology. And when I say agile, anybody familiar with agile methodologies? Most of you, if you know about it at all, and Eric will be talking about it, think of agile software development. And there is a whole industry about agile software development. But can anybody think about, and by the way, agile just means what it sounds like. Very rapid, very quick. Anybody think of any agile hardware development methodologies for something not in computers?
Rapid prototyping.
I'm sorry?
The prototyping of the plastic mill machine.
Yeah. What else? Who in fact made an entire industry out of rapid development? Non-computer. Anybody think of Toyota? Ran rings around GM. Just as an example. GM, if you actually per-charted it out there, bringing a car to market, biggest problem was how long it took to make a sheet metal tool, right? One of those big stamping dies. Had to be perfect. Takes 4 years to get all that stuff right. Late binding decision. Toyota went, screw it. We'll make a couple dies early, and we'll eat the cost, and we'll get to market 18 months early. And just by having nonlinear thinking, that said, wait a minute, the most important thing is time to market. We could eat the cost if we just amortize that cost of doing some early dies quick. So we kind of believe that this combination of customer development and some agile product development allows you to do continuous customer interactions and set up something which also seems to be antithetical, at least to the last 10 years of startups, and that is actually making money from day one, which now in this lean environment, facing bankruptcy kind of brings in profitability as like a goal rather than some future, faraway fantasy. For me, a lean startup has a business model that burns very little cash and understands and charges from day one. Big idea. Anybody know, by the way, how much money Microsoft raised total to start the company? Anybody know?
50,000.
Yeah, depending who you hear, 50 grand or $1 million, they didn't spend a cent. eBay, anybody know? Less than $1 million, they never cashed a check. You could go on and on of some of the most and the largest and most successful companies. They actually had customers who were willing to pay Siebel in enterprise software. Their customers paid them to develop the product. That was even more impressive. In fact, they probably, wait a minute, how does that work? They understood that they were building was a profitable product, not going from funding line to funding line. And for early stage startups, sometimes you think your product is the next VC pitch. Anybody ever get into that trap? Come on, somebody could raise their hand. 'Cause, I don't know, he's scratching his head. Another big idea about lean startups is you don't scale until you have revenue. And by scale, I mean, we got 12 salespeople, we got a marketing department, we're running ads. Well, how are we doing? Oh, we haven't shipped yet. Well, I don't get it. Oh, well, our business plan said we're scaling the sales force. I understand, but the world's kind of changed. Yeah, but the business plan said where's the line that says you're going out of business? Because, looking at my watch, you're dead. A lean startup also has another big idea, which, again, isn't obvious. It assumes that both who your customers are and their characteristics and the ultimate product features are unknown. Not known, unknown. And you're going, what are you talking about? How can you start a company not knowing who the customers are or what the hell the product is? Can I wake up now? I mean, that doesn't work. Well, I don't mean you can't have a hypothesis about who the customers are. In fact, you need a hypothesis of who the customers are. You need what we call the vision, who the customers are, and these are the features they're going to need. Great. Now let's assume that's all wrong. Could be right, but I'm glad you have one. Now get the hell out of the building, and as quickly as you can, as inexpensively as you can, in fact, hopefully profitably as you can, find out whether that's correct and see if you get people to pay for them now, even before you have a product. And if it's a good enough product, you'll have a line of people. And if it's a bad enough product, at least talking to potential customers will help you understand what it is you do need to build. And this, in a nutshell, is a lean startup, which is low burn by design, not crisis. And by crisis, I mean you build a company for execution, you're burning cash, you go back to your investors for more money, and they start laughing. And that's the environment we're in. Anybody encounter that in the last couple of months? No, nobody wants to rate. They're kind of going, but I'm not going to say it here. This lean startup methodology leverages technology commoditization, meaning not only in software but in hardware. Things we used to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for are now open source, on the cloud, just available. Mostly for free, or can be leveraged at an incredibly small price. Agile management practices for product development are pretty well understood now. And what I mean by agile is I don't mean doing a software release in 9 months versus 18. If you particularly have a web startup and you're not releasing software multiple times a day, you're not agile. This is designed to test hypotheses and answer these unknown questions about customers and features.
So Steve comes from a business and marketing background. I come from a product development background and have done a couple of startups. The first one was in my dorm during the bubble, because that's what everybody was doing. It was a total disaster, as you can imagine. And then came to Silicon Valley to learn how the pros did it, and got to be part of one of these traditional startups that raised about $40 million. We spent 5 years in a stealth R&D process, and was also a total disaster. And so started to ask myself, boy, is there a better way to build startups? Because doing it via total chaos, that doesn't work. The traditional model has some flaws that we've talked about. And so did a company called InView where we, as Steve said, pursued a different model. And I just thought I'd say, to the point about hypotheses and knowing what you know and what you don't know, I can tell the story of InView 2 different ways. The first way is to say InView, from day one, was a 3D avatar social networking communication product that we thought would allow people to create their own identity online, create clothes. It was a user-generated content model where third parties create the content that people buy. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that space, but that's been very successful for us. And so I can tell you that story in a true way. It tells you that we were geniuses. We got it from day one. We knew that those were going to be the key attributes of the product, and then all we had to do for the next 5 years was execute on that plan. And that actually, there's some truth to that. But I can tell the story a different way, which is to say, we thought from day one, InView was an instant messaging add-on product that would allow us to bring a new kind of instant messaging product to market, bypassing the traditional barriers to entry in the IM market by being an add-on and allowing people to take this 3D avatar concept into the IM space. That's also a true statement, and that's a total mess. That's actually a terrible business to be in. There is no such thing as the IM add-on market, and 3D avatars, for reasons we can't get into today, don't work in an instant messaging context. So what I want to kind of emphasize is there's a certain chaos to early-stage startups. And when you look at them in retrospect, what we tend to do is pick out the aspects of the plan that were correct and then go about removing from our historical memory all the other parts. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody. I mean, historical revisionism is essential for VC pitches and for publicity events and for a lot of reasons. It's like a very useful skill that we develop. But when you start to believe your own story with the facts removed is when you get into trouble. And so for those of you who've been in, especially in a software kind of company, but when you're dealing with this chaos, one impulse is to say, you know what, we're going to do this iterative customer development thing with the business and marketing folks, but we better not tell the engineers. Because they get spooked easy, and they're busy with their linear execution, and they're doing the alpha and the beta and the milestones, and you know what it's like. You go to engineers and say, I want to change the spec just a little bit. That's not going to change the delivery date, right? And then you have an epic marathon negotiation where things go all to hell. Yeah, so what I'm here to represent, that isn't the way that it has to be. And there's this phenomenon called agile development, which is really trying to say, let's build the product development team also in an iterative way so that we can build every aspect of our product for flexibility, assuming that we don't know what we don't know. So, the most important thing is what Steve already said, which is that the speed at which we can do releases and do tests is rapidly accelerated. So at InView, we do on average 50 releases to customers every day, every single day. And for those of you who have ever been in a kind of cowboy coding environment where people just kind of make changes willy-nilly and don't care about the consequences, that's not what I'm talking about. Right? We have to do those releases at that pace without taking the site down, without reintroducing old bugs that we thought were fixed, and without negatively impacting any one of 1,000 business metrics. Because, of course, there's no point in deploying a bunch of features if they drop your revenue to zero. You've got to ask.
Really sorry, I have to ask. So what do you do with 50 product lists?
If you're familiar with the concept of work-in-progress inventory, like from lean manufacturing, the idea that when you're in the middle of building something, that's actually not an asset, it's a liability. The idea is that for the software that we're writing, every line of code that we have written but is not deployed to customers is a form of work-in-progress inventory, and our goal is simply to minimize it. So that means that every time any engineer in our organization gets to a point of they have a module of code, could be 10 lines, that is complete, it's got the right unit test coverage for those that know what I'm talking about, they're actually going to check it into our source control repository, and that's going to kick off a deployment to production. That is, there's no distinction whatsoever between the head of our development branch and what is running for our customers. what that requires us to do is a lot of infrastructure to make sure that each stage of the deployment process is completely automated and also completely fail-safe. And we can't talk about those details now, but if anyone's interested, we could get into it after the lecture. But it also allows us to do things like, we want to run a split test to ask, boy, would it be better if this design kind of looked like this or kind of looked like that? Instead of having a debate, a product management debate where we figure out where in the milestones can that be slotted in to ask the question, instead, we'll just do the experiment right then. That is, a lot of these experiments, a lot of those pieces of code in those 50 releases a day take longer to discuss than they do to actually implement. So the idea is, don't waste time discussing them. Implement first. So, not ready, aim, fire, but fire, ready, aim. That is, put it into production with a small percentage of our customers, find out how they respond to it, get that data, and bring the data to the product management meeting to say, hey, I think we should change features in the following way. And someone says, well, I don't know. Well, customers will be like, actually, I have the facts. Think how much faster that product development, that management meeting can be compared to the old one where you're kind of debating philosophy ad nauseum. Does that answer your question? There's more to it than that, but that's the summary, yeah?
But doesn't this only apply to like a consumer-based type of service? Like if you do this to a business, they'll be like, hey, where did my button go? Oh, my button went down in the bottom corner. And
So the tactics change, the principles don't. I don't want to get into too much detail, but you're imagining a scenario where we're putting software into production to customers' hands in a way that negatively impacts them, and therefore negatively impacts our business. And actually the mechanism by which we do that is designed to make that impossible. So it will look really different in an enterprise context than it does in a consumer context, but my feeling is if you can build cars with this, you can build anything with it. Somebody else here? All right. So I won't say too much about technology commoditization. I think that's kind of a well-understood phenomenon that is changing the way things work, the whole Web 2.0 phenomenon. Some people think that's about social networking, but it's really about new kinds of leverage in product development process. So open source, free and open source software, cloud computing, that's well known, but also data-oriented architectures where the customers generate the content that drives the value in the organization, things like Google AdWords, which allow you to access leverage distribution with extremely small batch size. That can drive your costs down, and that's what most people have focused on in this trend. I just want to be here to say it also means that you can bring new products to market much faster. And that's actually the more important advantage from my point of view to this phenomenon. So at InView, from the day we founded the company to the day we had our first public beta in customers' hands charging them money was exactly 6 months. That's it. So we were making money, not very much, but we were making money from our customers 180 days into the process of founding the company. That wouldn't have been possible in a previous technology era because we were able to cobble together our product from tons and tons of highly leveraged pieces. So I want to talk a little bit about what is this agile software development model, and it's traditional in development methodology talks to first talk about waterfall development. That is the old style of product development that assumed a kind of linear process through.
How many people are in software? Can I just ask? Okay, so for the rest of them, Eric, just let them go to sleep for now.
Yeah, just bear with me for a second. I'll try to reconnect these concepts to other businesses. But since I wanted to give you some specific examples, I thought I'd talk about what this looks like in software. But also traditional manufacturing worked this way too. Requirements, design, implementation, some verification process, and maintenance. You make a plan, maybe 18 months is your planning horizon, maybe it's 3 years. And progress in this kind of situation is advancing through the plan. Anyone ever celebrate because the design for a product was completed? I've been in those meetings all the time. That's like a major deal. You have all these requirements. You weren't sure how would they fit together into a design. And you accomplished that goal. So accomplishing the plan is progress. And of course, if you're trying to think about what's the feedback loop duration for this, if you're on an 18-month planning horizon, between the time that you realize, oh my God, this new product is really what customers want, and the first time you can really get any feedback about it could be months, and certainly not minutes or hours. So it's much slower. But for certain types of products, this is really the way it has to be, right? You're building a space shuttle. It's not going to iterate. The thing has to either fly or not explode, hopefully. So my point is not that every product should be built this way, but early stage startups.
We've iterated that twice, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, but at least only 10 years in between iterations. Could be worse. And so you're not really celebrating a business milestone. You're celebrating that you're executing your plan, and that can lead to what we like to call achieving a failure. And that's, we've all had that experience. So this is what traditional agile software development looks like. This diagram is a little hard to read from here, but this is called extreme programming. This is one of many pretty well-known software development methodologies. And what's interesting about agile software is that although it is focused on agility, it was actually developed not in a startup context, but in a big company context. All of the original practitioners of this new iterative way of product development worked for very large companies. And the reason is because this is ideal for a scenario where the problem is actually well known, but the solution is somewhat unknown. So like the canonical agile project would be, you need to build a new gigantic payroll system for a giant corporation. Now, you can ask the question, well, what should the payroll system do? The answer is always easy. It should do exactly what the old payroll system that already had to have existed. How else could we have a gigantic company do? But it should do it better, faster, cheaper. It shouldn't run on COBOL and hardware that was developed 20 years ago, but we want to bring it to the modern era. What's wild, at least to me, is that in the traditional model, the absolute majority of those projects never complete. It's not just that they come in way over budget or they're extremely low quality, but a lot of them just fail outright. They kind of spiral out of control because the plan just didn't match reality at all. So agile software development is a way to say, look, since we understand what we're trying to build, let's still build that same thing iteratively. So for example, you would have one of the key techniques we try to represent here is you would actually have a member of the payroll department, someone from accounting, sit in the same office as the engineers who are building the product the whole time the product is under development. So think about that from an OODA point of view. An engineer has a question, gosh, should this screen kind of look like this or should it look like that? In the old way, they'd file a ticket that would go to their manager, that would go to someone's manager, that would get the product answered some other place and it would come back. Who knows how long that would take? Instead, turn around to the person sitting right next to me, say, hey, could you take a look at this? Like this or like that? Like that? Okay, great. So now we've compressed that particular piece of feedback from potentially months to minutes. That works really well. But the problem is, what if the problem you're trying to solve is also unknown? That is, in a traditional early stage startup, who's the customer you want to have come sit next to you? I mean, sure, your business plan says our customer shall be middle-aged men between this age who have this income. So you could go get one of those people and put them in your office. It does work, but what if you're wrong? Or what if the kind of product you're building, I'm sure you guys have seen cases where a product that started out as a consumer product wound up as an enterprise product, or vice versa. Right? So the level of wrongness you can have is so severe that it requires a whole different approach to being iterative. And so what Steve and I have been collaborating on is to say, let's take this customer development process going on with business and marketing, and let's marry it into a giant company-wide feedback loop with what's happening in product development, where new hypotheses to try are constantly coming out of our contact with customers, as well as insights that we've gained from our qualitative analysis. But also, we're feeding back into that process data, answers to those hypothesis questions, but also insights and analysis that happen in the product development organization. Because quite often, the way you discover that a hypothesis is profoundly, profoundly wrong is you've got some engineer somewhere trying for months to execute against that hypothesis and failing every time. And maybe you replace him because obviously it's that he's incompetent, right? We'll get a new engineer, and then she fails too. And then, she was incompetent too. So you keep trying more people. Someone's going to make this thing work, and eventually someone might say, wait a minute, I don't think that the product as spec has any customers whatsoever. Can we have that conversation? Being able to have that conversation on both sides of the wall is a lot more powerful and, again, collapses that feedback cycle time down to extremely fast. So you might ask the question, we said can I back up with this thing? Oh, wow. Here we said the unit of progress was advancing through the methodology. You might ask, well, what's the unit of progress in an agile situation? And the reason why agile is so powerful is it allows you to say that the unit of progress is a piece of working code. That is, if you build a design for something, if you build a documentation for something, or you have a meeting about something, that's not progress. Progress is building product that works. But what about in the startup situation? How can we measure progress? How can we say we've actually accomplished something? If you're building a product that nobody wants, successfully building more of that product is not success. That's actually complete waste. And if our goal is to bring the waste out of our development process, we need to be able to say, what is our goal? And so here we think the unit of progress fundamentally is learning about customers. That is, your whole company needs to be evaluated at all levels by how well today did we learn something about what our customers, who's our market going to be, who are our customers eventually going to be, what do they want, what's the right product to serve them.
Customer development, I think we talked about many times now, is about rapid hypothesis testing and having gates for you, your team, and your investors. The question is, what does that actually look like? Well, it's a parallel process to the product development process. Customer development has 4 steps: discovery, validation, creation, and company building. Think of customer development as done by all the people who are focused outside the building in your early stage startup. And its goal is to turn market risk and hypotheses into facts. And the 4 steps, as I said, discovery. Its step is to take every hypothesis you have and turn it into a fact. It sounds incredibly simple. Well, okay, I wrote the plan, I got some money, it must be a fact. Not the case. I don't care how much money you've raised, what awards your business plan won. I just think your business plan is a funny, short story. Your goal is to put your business plan away, put your award-winning product slides away, which is really hard for a world-class entrepreneur. I had to have the slides grabbed from my fingers. I want you to leave, in fact, your computer at home. Go out and start talking to customers. I want you to validate a series of hypotheses, 2 which are critical. Implicit in any business plan is you have a critical assumption, and that is, on some level, you're solving a customer's problem, right? That's what a plan is. In exchange for my solution, you will give me money because you will value what I'm providing. Great. Go out and find me those customers who have that problem. I want to hear it from them. Thank you for telling it to me. That doesn't count for anything. I want you to find customers who do raise their hand and say, why, yes, we have that problem. It's number 78 on my list. Oh. Well, okay, let's go another guy. Yeah, it's number 39 on my list. Uh-oh. Now you're the one with the problem. Right? Really, what you want to understand for a business you could grow is that the problem you've identified is, important enough for a customer to want to pay for it or change it or do something immediately. And the second key thing you want to hear is that your product concept, not your spec, not your data sheet, not your demo, not your feature set, your concept actually can solve the problem. And it's the customer who says that, not you. The second step, validation, is to build a repeatable and scalable sales process. And that doesn't mean we hire a sales force. It means that the early founding team has figured out the steps necessary to sell the product without a sales organization. We'll get into some more detail in a second. Customer creation. This third step used to come first. Customer creation is Steve's euphemism for marketing, communications, and branding, which used to occur all the way to the left of this diagram in the internet bubble. I raised $20 million. Great, I'm going to spend $30 million in advertising. Do the math. Now, I don't let startups, at least anything I'm involved with, spend a dime on creating demand until you've gone through the discovery and validation phase. Do you have a question?
Yeah, question on the discovery phase.
Yeah.
One of the issues I'm faced with right now is that I went through the market research process, and people say, I want a product.
Right.
I'm still waiting 2 months later, and it's generated $1 revenue. So I'm questioning, how do we deal with or navigate through false positives?
Great. And that's what the validation phase is about. So a lot of times, in fact, thank you for pointing this out. You notice that feedback loop for validation on the bottom? That actually is for, I thought I heard a lot of positives. Okay, and now I went, great, you said you love it. Give me an order or give me some money. And they went, well, we were only kidding. You didn't say you actually wanted to get paid for it. Well, think about what would have happened in a real startup, or not that you don't have one, but where you actually scaled your sales organization and your spending based on those promises from day one. This model assumes that you will get false positives. You know what happens in a traditional startup when that happens? I'll tell you a great story. For those of you who've been in a startup, you'll recognize the story. In a traditional startup, you execute off the business plan because that's been vetted by your investors. And you have first customer ship. You have a VP of sales. First board meeting after first customer ship, everybody's still, coming off of the high of the party or whatever you had for your announcement. And the board goes, how are sales? VP of sales says, oh, the pipeline's really full, as per plan. We got pipeline, great. We'll see our first orders next quarter. Have another board meeting next quarter. How are sales? And the sales guy goes, or woman says, hey, it's going great. We really got a great pipeline. The revenue is a little deferred, and the VCs kind of glance over the VP of sales. It's only the first quarter. Okay. Next board meeting after that. It's kind of interesting that no one's sitting next to the VP of sales. How are sales? She looks at her feet and pipeline. And the VCs cock one collective eyebrow at the CEO and just kind of nod. And one more board meeting. And now the stench of death. In fact, not only is anybody sitting, the whole boardroom is like on one side, and the VP of sales, you can almost see the spotlight of death. Right? Pipeline, boom. VP of sales is gone. Who shows up in the next board meeting? New VP of sales. What does the new VP of sales do? Who do they blame?
Product.
Marketing. Right? 6 more months, who's gone then? VP of marketing. Right? And if it's a bad economy, next 6 months, CEO's gone, company's shut down. Instead of doing that, we assume that your initial hypotheses about what you've heard, even if you've done great discovery, are usually wrong. I didn't put this thing here because of accident. It just happens that sometimes what you thought you heard doesn't stand the test of, okay, now I want money for it. And if you've built a burn rate into the company, it's unrecoverable. If, in fact, you said, this is a natural thing that happens, we're keeping burn intensely low until we actually get some initial sales that validate our first hypothesis. Make sense?
May I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Whereas Russell with is, I'm not sure, is it because of my product or is it because I'm not established yet?
Right. And I'm happy to talk to you offline about that. Just as an aside, one of the things I did early on with venture capitalists was ask them, why do startups fail? Seems like a very simple question you would think people have asked all the time. And here we are in Silicon Valley where we take more technical risk per square foot than probably any other place in the world. And yet, VCs were telling me that over 90% of failed companies didn't fail because the technology didn't work, but they failed because they simply didn't have enough customers. So if the failure is not from product development, then why do we have tons of product development methodologies? Anybody ever use product management tools or any? Yeah, lots of them, right? You can name an alphabet soup. How many processes are there to manage the activities outside the building in a startup? Now, I'm not talking about a sales pipeline tool or a CRM tool. I'm talking about finding the early customers to figure out whether we have a pipeline. This is the pre-pipeline tool. And the answer is that there really isn't any. And so our idea was to focus on this parallel process from product development. And so the big idea is, as I mentioned, it's parallel, it has measurable checkpoints. It's not tied to the first customer ship of the product. Anybody ever been to a first customer ship party? Anybody? Right. What were you celebrating? Great. Who was at the party?
All of the development team.
Who else?
No customers.
Who else in the company? Anybody been to one with that sales and marketing got invited? Anybody? Yeah? Chuck? Sure. Why were they celebrating?
Depends on whether they have customers.
Right. This is not metaphorical. We tend to celebrate and use as a milestone in Silicon Valley this notion of first customer ship. It's one of the leading causes of death. Right there. No, seriously. Psychologically, that in fact, just back up a bit and think about this. It is kind of funny. But if you think about it, your culture is already screwed in your startup. If you allow anybody in your company to think that engineering's first release is a cause for celebration for anybody but the engineers who were working on the product, you're screwed. Because if your sales and marketing people are celebrating, unless they've blown through those years' numbers, in fact, if I were them, I'd be, in fact, like going home and updating my resume because now it gets scary for sales and marketing. They should not be celebrating. They should be having a stiff drink at a bar somewhere else going, ooh, can we really do this? Does this make sense? It is, psychologically, we take for granted everybody goes to the FCS party. But in fact, psychologically, we're saying the wrong thing. And we'll talk about market types in a second. So you've heard this, no facts inside your building. Here's another one. Develop for the few, not many. It's really easy to think of customer development as, oh, I get it. This is this great focus group. I go outside and figure out all the features people want. But in fact, customer development is the inverse of that. Big idea. What I'm suggesting you do is you take the company's vision, its hypotheses, and you're trying to find whether there are customers in a market for the product as spec'd, not figure out how many features people can ask for. In fact, your goal on this customer development team is to figure out what's the minimum feature set at first customer ship, not the maximum feature set. That's a really big idea. Because if every time you come back to engineering and say, well, here are the 6 more things people wanted, you're not only adding value, we should have sent you home. Your job is to understand customers deeply enough to say, here's the archetype of who our customers are. That is, they're a female between the ages of 18 and 27. These are the things they do. When you're developing a product, think that they're using these other applications. They need this, and this is what they want. Oh, now I get it. Well, we don't need these other lines of code because all this stuff is superfluous.
And in fact, many times we have to dumb down the feature set that was intended at the time to make it simple enough for those early customers.
Right. Right. Or sometimes the feature set was, gee, for a wide variety of demographics, it had to solve all these people's problems, and you're actually out there finding out, ooh, the only first customers will be these segments, and they don't need any of this stuff. If you ever want a world-class example of this, hold up your iPhone. Okay? It doesn't even do copy and paste, for God's sake. Right? If anybody doesn't do copy, what are the other? You can make a list a mile long about the stuff it doesn't have. But the stuff it does have is elegant and it's simple. And this is something that escapes a lot of teams. Is, oh, let's go out and get all this data so we can tell engineering the more things we need. If that's what you're thinking, forget anything you... Don't even tell people you came to the customer development session, because I'd be embarrassed. Your goal is to come back with the key elements of what you need. Yes?
One thing that we found is a lot of times customers don't know what they want
Right.
really until they get it and start playing with it anyway. So
Right.
what they think they want and what they actually want changes as soon
Right.
as they start.
And so that's one of the key reasons why early stage ventures, entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurship is not a spreadsheet. It's an art. And your job in doing customer development is try to translate this for your development team, or else it would be, let's send them out a memo, and hopefully we could just get the feedback. It really is an art of trying to figure out, did they get it? Is it because they didn't understand it? Did it really need a demo, etc.? The other thing is that there's a group of early customers which I call early evangelists. Internal evangelists who are smarter than you are. I've always been stunned. I always thought, it's my idea, no one's ever heard of this, I'm going to just go out and in every situation, I've had people say, yeah, I get it, and by the way, have you thought about these 17 other things? And you go, whoa, and how come you're not doing this? Oh, Steve, everybody in the industry has been talking about this. we're just not crazy enough to quit our jobs and bet our entire, future on like doing a startup. And I go, crazy. No, okay, all right. Half the time, these people will not only be your first customers, but they'll be passionate. They will be your evangelist and start communicating how wonderful this is. So the goal for release 1 is the minimum feature set for these early evangelists. As I said, customer discovery, you get outside the building. Exit criteria is that you know what your customers' top problems are, and for you, how much would they pay for them? The trick I used to play in enterprise software was you find passionate customers. Yes, I love the product. Yes, yes, yes. Well, would you pay $1 million for it? Steve, are you out of your mind? We don't ever get a budget for more than $475,000. And in enterprise software, if anybody ever been in the space, you know the goal is not to sell one seat. You have to get it deployed company-wide. So, well, you might find somebody passionate if it can't get deployed. So the other question I always used to ask is, how much is it? It's free. No, Steve, how much is it? Well, I said, just for the sake of this discussion, it's free. Oh, it's free. So, great. How many will you be deploying? Because we've been having this dialogue for 2 months. Well, I forgot to tell you, the IT people need to approve it, and the CFO needs to sign off anyway. Now, all of a sudden, you've just uncovered issues you've never even heard about. Right? In discovery, this is where you play these games to find bounding boxes of what it would actually take. Now, in reality, no one customer will tell you all this stuff. That's why it takes lots of meetings over a lot of time. And the answer is, how many meetings? Depends on your industry. Depends when you start hearing the same data again. If you start hearing all the same stuff again and again, then you maybe have heard enough. In Eric's case in InView, they not only did customer interviews, but what did you spend? $5 a day in Google AdWords to get people over the web to come in and actually try the product. And then they interviewed a portion of them. My other test of whether you know enough is draw a day in the life of the customer. I don't mean a day in the life in their work or a day in the life when they're using the product. Tell me what they do when they get up. Where do they live? By the way, just as an axiom, there's 63,000 people in Silicon Valley who will always buy your product. Okay, anybody else going to buy it? Don't laugh, right? Don't tell me that you're on TechCrunch and therefore your market's made. Right? Okay, we got tech or we're done. No. Tell me how the person in Kansas, who's doesn't read TechCrunch, is going to use or deploy this product. I want to understand what kind of car do they drive. What do they read? How are you going to reach them? What's important to them? You really need to understand day in the life. And then eventually, this is even before you're ever selling anything. Draw the org chart of the users, the buyers, the saboteurs, whatever. And when you think of, I'm talking about enterprise, anybody ever sell video games? Anybody? Video game software? Well, you can imagine. Video game. Who's the customer?
The distributor.
Yep. And you ever sell video games to kids?
Not direct.
All right. So imagine for a second, kids, 15 years old. You're selling to kids. Who's the decision maker? Who's the customer? Maybe the distributor, maybe mom, maybe whatever. That is, unless you could draw the org chart of users and buyers. Anybody ever buy a car? Any of the guys? Excuse me, I'm going to be sexist for a second and politically incorrect. Anybody, guy who's married, ever buy a car? Yeah. Who's the decision maker? Not in my house, I'm not, right? No, the women, you could laugh because I thought, well, I'm the man of the house. And my wife, no, Steve, no. The car seat, it won't fit with the car seat. It's a sports car. No. Never got that Porsche. My point is, while you're thinking that this org chart is an enterprise thing, it's really important that you understand this stuff day one. And by day one, I mean, great, you got funded, you got your idea. If you're in Silicon Valley, 90% of the time or half the time, you're technology-driven. But this is not something that will come down from heaven. This is hard work. And this is hard work outside the building, and you simply skip it at your peril. The next step, customer validation, is by this time, you want to develop a repeatable and insert the word scalable sales process. My favorite story on this one is, after I retired, I used to get phone calls from venture capitalists, and they go like this. Steve, do us a favor. We know you're retired, but you're an investor in our fund. We're having a marketing problem, and insert name of company here. Marketing problem. Okay, good. I'm an ex-marketeer. I'll go in, interview the CEO. What's the problem? Oh, we're not making our numbers. Well, I thought you had a marketing problem. Well, that's what the VP of sales says it is. Only half of you are laughing. So I hope you get is that the first excuse. Anybody have VP of sales in the room? Let me just, good, all right. Isn't that first excuse? No, not my problem. It's a marketing problem. The literature's not good, or the positioning's wrong, or whatever. Oh, we got to, great. And so after a while, I got pretty sophisticated at this. I'd say, how many salespeople you have? And the answer always was, by the time I got a call, I don't know why, 12. I don't know why. And now I got pretty good. There's one in Boston, right? How'd you know? Because if you have 12 salespeople, there's always one in Boston. So I had a diagnostic, which eventually became a remote diagnostic, which was, have the salesperson in Boston send us their presentation. What do you mean send it? It's the corporate pitch. I said, how long have you been having this problem? Well, 6 months. I said, have them send the presentation he or she is actually using now. Do you think that presentation had any correlation with the one that marketing made up? No. Smart but desperate salespeople will go, well, this ain't working. I'm making my own. By this time, what's happened to a company is you have, pick your number, typically 12, people burning cash, not making their numbers, thrashing, truly thrashing in the field, because there isn't a repeatable and scalable process. But the only thing that was scalable is what we hired the salespeople per the plan. And I'm going to tell you the bad news, which no one ever wanted to hear. I used to tell the VCs, it's not a marketing problem, it's a sales scalability problem, blah, blah, blah. Well, how do we fix it, Steve? Fire 10 of the salespeople. No, that's not what I said. Well, let me, and after a while I said, well, let me tell you what's going to happen. You're going to say, no. We're going to hang up. You're going to laugh, blah, blah, blah. After 3 more board meetings, you're going to fire 10 of the salespeople. I didn't get the calls anymore because they knew exactly what to do. When it got to that point, it was irretrievable, not through the fault of a single sales organization, but actually for the board, letting the company get to a point where, here's the trick. In a startup, when you start adding sales or marketing resources, one increment of a salesperson ought to equal 1 point X increment of sales revenue. It's that simple. If you don't know that, if you don't know when I add this resource that revenue is going to go up, you have not found a scalable and repeatable sales process. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just don't scale until you do that. Question?
I was just going to ask whether you need any salespeople at all.
Right. So my point is that not until you have found a scalable and repeatable process. Now, some founders who are come out of complete technology can't do this themselves, and you need either another founder or a senior whatever to do this. But my point is, you don't want a traditional VP of sales who says, oh, I was just hired. Time to call the Rolodex and hire more people. That's not what you're looking for here. You're looking for a scalable and repeatable process. Well, we'll make it up and we'll hire more salespeople. Now, that might sound silly in the classroom, but when you get into the chaos of a startup, that's exactly what you tend to do. Does this make sense so far? Okay. So the exit criteria is, do you have a proven sales roadmap? Do you understand the sales cycle? There are all these funny buzzwords in a sales organization: average selling price, lifetime value, return on investment, etc. You need to understand all of those. And it could go on forever, but you really need to understand your business model, sales model. It will scale. We're going to add more resources, etc. And you have a set of orders validating the roadmap. In InView's case, we had a hockey stick. In this case, the hockey stick went from $300 a month to all of $8,000 a month. But it was a hockey stick. And everybody thought I was crazy. I said, time to raise venture money. They said, Steve, we went from 300, we're not missing a zero here. It's just 8,000. I said, no, look at the shape of the curve. Well, no. The shape's artificial. I said, trust me, we're raising venture money. We raised it, and 9 months later, we were doing $1 million a month. And does the financial model make sense? The next step is customer creation. Customer creation is, you should be so lucky to get to this step. Anybody ever read Jeff Moore, Crossing the Chasm? Fundamental book. Absolutely should have. It used to be that was the only good text for startups. And it basically said, hey, I got a whole bunch of sales, and I'm trying to figure out how do I scale my company. Now, my problem is, wait a minute, where's the book that comes before this? How do I get to have the Jeff Moore problem? Seriously, okay, I got it, but how did I get here? Because that's usually 2 years or so into a company. But sometimes you do get to the Moore problem, and that is how do you scale? And that's at the customer creation time. And creation is where you actually put all your marketing dollars behind demand creation. It's a strategy, not a tactic. Most people execute marketing communications, even in startups, like it's the job of some 24-year-old who you could pass on marketing tactics to. It is not. It is one of the most expensive things you do. And this means launch as well. You notice in this entire time, I've never said launch your company. Here's just an interesting heuristic. How many times do you get to launch your company? Once. Anybody ever, again, most of you said you were in a startup. Think back to the day you started your company. And think back how you described it on day one. Now think of how you describe it now that you actually have some experience. Now imagine launching it on day one versus launching it now. There comes a time where you actually have enough customer experience to know how to position and articulate your message. It's quite possible you could do a spectacular job launching the company to exactly the wrong set of customers with the wrong message. You don't get a redo button. There's not an undo in TechCrunch or New York Times or Wall Street or wherever you're creating demand. So the goal is to find a repeatable pattern before you do it. And let's hold the questions because I got 4 more minutes and then I'll take an infinite number of questions. The last step here is to note that there are 3 or 4 types of startups. Another big idea. A huge idea, actually. Almost as important as customer development itself. And that is thinking that all startups are the same is what gets us into trouble. You don't really need to do a year or 2 of customer development if you are in an existing market. And by in an existing market, I mean you have a higher performance or better product in a market where customers could say, well, yes, I am in that market, and I buy exactly from Intel, and you now have a chip 10 times better than the Intel Pentium. Great, I'll take it, because it's a faster chip. That's an existing market. But most startups in Silicon Valley are doing other things. One is you might be saying, I'm going after a segment of an existing market. That is, I want to go after a piece of this market because I understand the users better, I understand their needs better, and I'm going to, in fact, not attack the incumbents head on, but I'm going to take a piece of their business. And I'm going to do that either through a niche, or I might have a low-cost solution where I understand that everybody doesn't need all these features, that I could, in fact, offer a cheaper solution. That's a resegmented market. There's a third type of market that startups, particularly in Silicon Valley, go after, and that is new. I'm creating something no one's ever heard about. And how do you know you're in a new market? There's no customers. Oops. Now, as a science experiment, is anybody old enough to remember the Internet bubble Super Bowl ads? Right? Anybody remember those Super Bowl ads? What size was the Internet market in 1999? Anybody remember? Essentially 0 outside of Silicon Valley. Yet companies were advertising and branding and trying to create demand In fact, what I argue is we've ran a $1 trillion science experiment. No, we did. In saying infinite dollars can create market adoption at a faster rate than would normally occur. It was a great marketing stuff. For those of you in business school, awesome science experiment. Awesome. And it was probably with your professor's money. But market size really changes everything, and I won't go through it here, but you could imagine it changes cost of entry, how you spend, when you launch, how much finance you need, etc. So I hope we've given you today a taste of why it might be interesting to do a lean startup with low burn, the two pieces of a lean startup, agile product development and customer development, and maybe just have you thinking about the way you're doing your company, and there might be an alternative to look at as you go back to your office. So thank you very much. I'm here to take questions.